Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and Transformers issue number 9 is part of the Energon universe at IDW Skybound. Digging on it. Excuse me, there's another advertisement at the end of this comic book for Destro issue number 1, which should be coming out soon. Is it this week? Is it next week? I forget. Anyway, all sorts of good stuff going on. Let's get talking about who made this comic book. We'll go on from there. So we got Daniel Warren Johnson on writing, George Corona doing the art, Mike Spicer on colors, and Russ Wooten doing some letters. I just want to start off really quick. Seeing a bunch of these artists who I'm not familiar with, but these repeated names and colors is very interesting. It's saying a lot about the way that the comic book world, the owners, the writers, whoever, the editors are looking at in regards to what's going to make good comic book art. It's interesting they're focusing more on the colorists lately and the tenure of the colorists over the artists. Is it just because they want more artists to come popping in? I don't know, but it's something that I'm noticing. It's that there's so many artists whose names I don't know and so many colorists who have been around for quite some time on comic books nowadays. Just a thought. Anyway, this was interesting. Optimus Prime still has the Megatron arm, and it's the right arm, so therefore it has the fusion cannon. It's still attached. And with his left hand, he's using his own rifle. Two of the most powerful weapons in the Transformers universe. I mean, what's going to match that, right? Does Unicron actually have a beam that he can shoot at people? There's his eye beams, but I mean, give me a break, right? We're talking super ultra mega power, and yet Optimus Prime is still getting his butt handed to him. Now, it's cool in this regard because it's Shockwave. Now, I gotta say, Shockwave, and if you've ever seen and listened to my videos on the original Transformers series, I've got to continue with that because it was just such an incredible series. The original Marvel Transformers comic book starting in 1984, I believe it was. The absolute best in comic book storytelling and art for that matter. Absolutely beautiful, wonderful stuff. It's interesting because Shockwave there was actually such a badass that he would take on Megatron and win almost every single time. I mean, and they fought often enough, right? Seeing him here beating up Optimus Prime, it's like, okay, I still have memories of that. But nonetheless, I still have it in my heart that it's like, you're supposed to be Optimus Prime. What's more, this obviously isn't the same Shockwave because, I mean, for crying out loud, he's talking like an idiot for the most part, right? I'm trying to say it in his voice from the cartoon, that awesome voice where it's like, oh, a little bit of trepidation, but that obviously wouldn't have fit with the original series, and now this, I don't know what to make of this. I almost feel like it should be a clown voice. This Shockwave, he fights like the comic book Shockwave. He talks like a guy who's just getting out of a clown car with a whole bunch of other passengers. So I'm not sure where to go with this. And it is really frustrating to see Optimus Prime getting his butt handed to him in this. It's even worse to see that some Transformers were left behind. Not just the Autobot who was killed in this. Yes, an Autobot is actually shot through the chest by Soundwave holding Shockwave. He was holding with his left hand. Holding Shockwave in his transformed photon pistol. I think it was a photon energy wave pistol, whatever it was. Either way, it's like, it's a badass pistol, which is like, boom, I just blew up a planet. But that's the idea. Like, he's super ridiculously powerful, and I get it. Killed a Transformer today. And I'm like, oh, wow. They're getting serious with this. Another Transformer is actually freaked out. You can see his teeth. He has teeth. Transformers need teeth? Anyway, make him look more human. Even though he's not. He's like, because he was about to get shot, and it's like, it's messed up. And then you're seeing cowardice, but they're very real emotions. And it does make sense because the individual who's showing all of those emotions is a hothead. He's a full-blown hothead. And yeah, I could see a hothead, someone who doesn't have control over their emotions like that, actually freaking out when death is right around them, or the threat of torture as in this case. This was a very human comic book for these robots in disguise. Elita 1 is in this comic book, which is awesome. She shows up and she just straight up like owns Prime. She's just like, like giving him orders and he's barely holding it together. And I am very disappointed in Optimus Prime in this. But at the same time, it is kind of par for the course. He's Optimus Prime, but he acts like Orion Pax all the time. And it's just such a shame, right? I really want to see Prime being the Prime that we all imagined to be, because we're all sitting here thinking about Peter Cullen's voice, and I'm just not getting that. I'm simply not. And it's so heartbreaking. You're making your own Transformers universe, an Energon universe, and you could do whatever you want, and yet you're sticking to the idea that Prime he's that IDW Prime, and the only and maybe there's some ones that really spotlight how awesome he is, but most of what I see is that Prime simply isn't that awesome, and it's heartbreaking. He's the biggest disappointment in the comic book universe in that regards, because he's never been an effective leader in anything I've ever read of him. If you guys have suggestions of Optimus Prime being an effective leader for the Autobots, please let me know, because I would love to see it. For the most part, he's just your typical disappointment, and he's indecisive and not quite cowardly, but just weak in making dumb decisions. That being said, Spike. Spike seems to be the guy. Now remember, there's this one guy who was in a wheelchair back in the day in the Transformers comic book, or Transformers cartoon, season 1. And it was kind of cool seeing him because, whatever. They just made Spike into that kid pretty much. Spike winds up showing more courage than anyone and everyone else in this comic book, and it's a little disappointing to see, but I guess it is what it is. There was so much happening here as far as the humanistic aspect, which is cool to see since they're robots, most of them, right? Astro Train develops an incredible respect for Spike. I hope that actually leads to something instead of it just be some words that were said. I actually hope this leads to something, because it could lead to a really interesting relationship, friendship, right? Even a grudging respect, for crying out loud. Anyway, I am more curious to see what's going on with Spike than any other character in a Transformers comic book. This guy should not be front and center as part and parcel of the main character or the protagonist, and yet here we are. He's the most believable character. And I don't want to see Elita 1, who I don't have any real emotional attachment to. She's just she was like the original, for us cartoon people, the original female Transformer, which it was nice to see, but there's nothing more than just general nostalgia there. There is no substance there, not for me. Let's see where they can go with this. Anyway, I thought overall this was a pretty decent comic book. I got to see what's going to happen next to see if it's actually worthwhile to continue with the stories, but it is what it is. I also want to point out, completely unrelated to this comic book, but relatable to the comic book world, YouTubers particularly, just yesterday from my time recording this, Benny from the Comic Storian himself, his wife puts out a tweet and says that her husband, Benjamin Potter was his real name, she pointed out, died in some kind of an accident. I don't know what the accident was. Maybe it was a car accident. I don't know what to say about this. I will say that it's heartbreaking. A lot of people my age, I think he was younger than me, dying suddenly. So many people. It's just happening over and again, and it's crazy to see this. I will say, and I don't usually comment on a lot of these people dying. Maybe something similar, like I just talked about Jeffrey Vrege recently dying, even though it was 2 months ago. I just now got wind of it last week. I will say that Benny is one of the most likable people who I've ever seen on YouTube, even when he's bothered by something, he's usually got such a great attitude about it. And very few others have that ability to be likable despite. He's a former soldier. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe he was, in fact, a former soldier. And he used to put out some really solid content. I used to watch him a long time ago. I used to think I'm going to go into YouTube and do videos with my friend Pat, and we were just going to talk about movie. We're going to go every week and see a movie and do a review on a new movie that we'd seen. That wound up not working out because it turns out Pat was a psychopath. I'm not joking. He's a pretty cool guy, but I'm not saying he would kill somebody, but I'm saying if he did kill somebody, he wouldn't have understood why that was a bad thing. That's a psychopath. Anyway, so I kind of dodged that bullet, maybe in more ways than one. That being said, I remember I was wondering what could I do on YouTube because it seems like a really fun thing to do, to get out there and just talk. And Benny was actually Rob was the first guy I saw actually talking about comic books. And then Benny just kind of came out of nowhere. While Rob was that natural talent, Benny was like the smartest guy in the room. I remember the story where he talked about how he first started doing reviews on video games and just figured, let me do a couple things about comic books also, and then suddenly realized that was way exceeding his video game content, which is impressive considering that's not the way that YouTube was going at the time, right? It was all about the video gaming stuff, and that's the reason why an entire channel, Twitch, came out, right? Because of how popular that was, more so than the spoken word about some cartoons in between 20 or so pages of newspaper print, right? That's insane. And he was able to figure that out. And he used to work for YouTube or something to that effect. And he wound up knowing exactly what to do to make one of the most popular and one of the absolute hands down greatest channels, definitely one of the best comic book channels, arguably the best, right? Channel out there. And he seemed like a good guy to have as a friend. I've never actually spoken with Benny, not through emails, not online or an interaction with him, anything like. I've never had any kind of an interaction with him. Yet he was a huge inspiration into me getting into comic books. I've mentioned before that Comic Uno is actually the main reason why I got into comic books, because I saw her doing it and I loved the honesty. There was no showmanship to it whatsoever, because I leave that to people like Benny, who are so much better at it than me. He had a talent like you could not argue. I was more about the openness, and I don't care about the glitz and the glamour of it. I don't care if the channel becomes big. I'm just here to talk about comic books for the most part. So that being the case, I do want to end this fairly soon. I simply want to say that if it wasn't for Benny, there would be no Professor Bill. Well, I was Professor Bill when I used to teach at university, but it's not the same thing. There would be no Professor Bill or Comic Book University if it wasn't for Benny and his idea of doing that 4-person podcast. Anybody who remembers that guy in the back is whacking it or wanking it or whatever the heck it was. If you know, you know. If you don't, ask someone who does. Benny is a huge inspiration. And he's one of the reasons why I keep going, because I see this guy is just, he's always been on top. And I thought, as long as Benny is out there and doing what he's doing and still on top, then there's space for people to talk about comic books the way that I do, reviewing the comic book instead of reenacting it, verbally and the high production value that he does. There's still going to be room for someone of low production like me. What there is now is a gap. and I don't know that it'll be filled very easily. Comic Storian was quite literally the best there was at what he did, and everybody seemed to like it, me included. Guys, that's it for me. Um, Go send some love on Benny's channel for the last video that he put out. And I know Rob took it probably harder than anybody outside of his immediate family. A little bit of love his way too. I know that he actually gets depressed. I haven't listened to him in a while, but I do remember he does actually get depressed pretty easily, takes things hard. So a little love go a long way. This is what we do, right? Like the video, watch an ad. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.